Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Keep the Line Moving, a podcast designed to talk about leadership, life, and inspiration. I am your host, Chris Gargano, and for episode 59, the topic is this: tenacity. In a few weeks in Vegas, right before the Super Bowl, the 2023 NFL MVP will be announced. It will most likely be a quarterback. On our show this week is the 2002 NFL MVP, and he was a quarterback. His name, Rich Gannon. He played 17 years in the NFL. He was drafted in 1987 by the New England Patriots. He played for Minnesota, Washington, Kansas City, and ultimately found stardom with the Raiders, where he played for 6 seasons. He grew up in Philadelphia, went to the University of Delaware. He's in their Athletics Hall of Fame as a record-setting quarterback. Rich spent 16 years as an NFL commentator on CBS. He also does the preseason for the Raiders. So you know this guy. You know he is very upfront and very open about leadership, being a quarterback, and his trials and tribulations and successes during his career in the NFL. I'm so glad we have Rich. We taped this conversation a few months ago. So this is all about Rich Gannon and his leadership. He has a ton of wisdom, and he takes us behind the scenes. Time to rock, time to roll on Keep the Line Moving with Rich Gannon. It's great to see you. How are things going in a general sense? I know you're a busy man.
Well, Chris, it's great to be with you, a former teammate. And, I tell people all the time, I graduated from the University of Delaware in 1987. And since that time, I've been associated with the National Football League in one way or another, either as a player, as a broadcaster, as an analyst. So I tell people all the time, I never worked a day in my life. If you really love what you do and you're passionate about it, you're going to have success. And so I've been just fortunate and blessed to have the opportunity to, talk about, play a game that I love. And, I started playing organized football in second grade. And here I am, 57 years old, still talking about this great game that we love so much.
I love what you're saying about this, that you get to talk about something you love each and every day. So let's back up. When you were growing up in Philly and you were playing football and you rode crew and you were a basketball player, at what point, and I've asked other guests this because it's fascinating to me because I did not have this realization, but at what point did you realize I'm at a different level than those around me, and I have to do something about this because this could be really fulfilling, into college at Delaware and then eventually into the pros for you specifically?
That's a great question. I'm not really sure. I knew at a young age, first of all, I loved it. I had older brothers that played. I grew up in a neighborhood where we played ball all the time, whether it was football, baseball, basketball, street hockey. I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia, so I certainly benefited from that. I think by playing with older brothers and playing with older kids in the neighborhood, I became maybe a bit more proficient at an early age. I didn't know when I started playing when I was in second grade. I knew I was passionate about it. I knew it was something I really wanted to do. I told my mom when I was really, really young, I said, I want to be an NFL quarterback. I'm not so sure a lot of people at that age know. I wasn't sure I would ultimately get there, but I knew this was something that I was really serious about. And to my credit, I really put the work in. I mean, I wasn't the most talented. I wasn't the biggest, the strongest. I didn't have, the best arm, but I really felt like the key to my success was to outwork my competition. The key to my success was an internal belief system that I just knew that I could do it, and I just think I always tell young people, if you don't believe in yourself, nobody will. And that's really where it starts. You have to have that internal belief system that, I'm passionate, I'm willing to put the work in, and I can do this. And thankfully, thank God, my parents helped instill some of those qualities and characteristics that really helped me as a young athlete.
So then you go on to Delaware and you take that work ethic and that belief from your family. So you have all those foundational elements to succeed at Delaware. What was it like playing in college? I mean, you set 21 records. I mean, I could go on and on about how well you did, but what was it like framing the man that became ready for the NFL only a few years later?
I had some great mentors. I had an older brother who was a 3-year starter at Delaware. And when I was a freshman, he was a 5th-year senior. So I had the benefit of having some mentors and people that I looked up to and admired, some great coaching, great high school coach. And so I think that helped. In hindsight, if I wanted to be an NFL quarterback, I wouldn't have gone to Delaware and run a Delaware wing T. My story's a bit unique. I didn't get a lot of college offers. Didn't get a chance to go to Penn State or Notre Dame or Michigan. I had to go to a smaller 1AA school at Delaware. The good news is I was a 3-year starter. I got a lot of experience, but I had a lot to learn. So I look back fondly on my time at Delaware. Great teammates, great university. Got my degree in 4 years, and so it certainly propelled me for at least the opportunity to go to an NFL training camp.
So when you got drafted by the Patriots in 1987, what were those conversations like in that initial few weeks with that franchise before you were traded?
Chris, I was devastated. I mean, I worked out for a lot of teams, the Raiders being one of them, ironically, but I never worked out for the Patriots, never had a conversation with anybody with the New England Patriots at the time. In fact, I went to the combine and, just never thought that I'd get drafted by the Patriots. The Patriots actually were in really good shape. They still had Steve Grogan. They had Tony Eason and they had Tom Ramsey. They were just coming off of the Super Bowl season after the 85 season. So, they were in pretty good shape when it came to the quarterback position. And that's why I was shocked when I got a call from Raymond Berry, the head coach, and Dick Steinberg, the general manager. And I'll never forget it. Get this call and they say, "Hey, Rich, congratulations. We made you our 4th round pick. We're really excited. We just want to find the best position for you." And I thought to myself, you guys made a huge mistake. And I just knew right then and there's no way I was going to go to the New England Patriots. Chris, I had seen so many players over the years, especially coming from a program like Delaware, some of the smaller schools, go to an NFL training camp and be the last cut, and then go back the next year and be the last cut, and then go to another team and waste 4 or 5 years of their lives trying to make it in the NFL. I had already been accepted to law school. My father was an attorney. I was smart enough to know that if I went to an NFL training camp, put on a different set of pads, a different helmet, and tried to start tackling people, that I probably wasn't going to make the team. And so I called them, I think the next day, and I said that, "Look, guys, this was a mistake. I'm not going to come, and I'm going to go to law school." And fortunately for me, 6 days later, I got traded to the Minnesota Vikings.
And did they welcome you with open arms, and were they comfortable with the fact that you wanted to remain a quarterback?
Yeah, actually, the Vikings were ready to pick me in that same round, as it turned out, and they, they're disappointed. And then they wound up taking a guy named Brent Pease in the 11th round. I believe it was the 11th round. And so they traded for me. I went to Minnesota. I got the opportunity to watch and listen and learn from 2 older quarterbacks. Tommy Kramer had been to a Pro Bowl. Wade Wilson was getting ready to go to his first Pro Bowl. So it was a really good situation for me because I wasn't ready. I was 21 years old. I played in a wing T offense, didn't know a lot about protections, the NFL passing game concepts, defenses. I had a lot to learn. And so those first years in Minnesota were good for me.
So then the career takes off. Now, I know that you had different coaches that believed in you in different ways, right? You would enter training camp as the number 2 or the number 3 or the starter. Now, this is what I appreciate about you very much, is that mental resilience that you have, that you never appeared to be wavering from your true abilities. But that's from the outside. What was it like inside, being a young quarterback, knowing, geez, I got to do this for Denny Green. I got to do this for this Paul Hackett. I got to all these different complexities. How did you maneuver in those days?
It was a battle, just to try and get reps in practice, right? Your first year, you're just trying to make the football team. And then eventually I became the backup and got a chance to play a little bit in 89, 90, 91, but it was never really my team until 92 when the Vikings hired Denny Green, and I held out a training camp. I was without a contract, and that, I'm sure he didn't appreciate that. I wind up starting the season. We get off to a great start. We're 8-3. We're, I think, 2 or 3 games up on everyone in our division, and he sits me down for 2 weeks and never said a word to me. He never said a word to me from the time he got there until the time he traded me the following year. So unfortunately for me, probably my first 10 years in the league, there was never a coach that truly believed in me enough to hand me the keys to the car, just to say, "Hey, you're our guy. We're going to stick with you through thick or thin." That conversation, it didn't happen until later in my career. Jerry Burns, I don't think he was a huge fan of my game. Denny Green came in, obviously, the 1 year I had with him. I got traded the following year. I was in Washington for 1 year. I got traded right before the start of the season. I had shoulder surgery. And then I was out of football a year. I had I rotator cuff repair. I missed the 94 season and really I was kind of damaged goods and got an offer to sign either with the 49ers or the Chiefs. And I thought the situation with the Chiefs was a better one. And I signed in Kansas City and wound up having 4 really good years there, primarily as a backup. I got a chance to play quite a bit in 2 of those seasons, enough to show Al Davis and John Gruden that I'd be a good fit for the Raiders. But again, of course, I was long in the tooth at that point. I think I was 33 years old or, whatever, by the time the Raiders signed me, and so kind of a vagabond, kind of a guy that had bounced around the league a little bit, never really was a, primary starter. And so from the Raiders standpoint, it was a bit of a risk.
Just before we get to the Raiders, because there's a lot to talk about there, because your success was unbelievable. You said something that made me fascinated here. So you had the height, you had the speed, you had the arm strength, you had obviously the intelligence. We could never understand how we were perceived in our journeys to get to where we want to go. But what do you think it was that why you just weren't given the starting role at certain stages prior to the Raiders? Do you have a way of assessing that now? Does it make sense? Is it just
I mean, I think, as you age, as you mature, you look back, you have a better sense of things. Look, I'm not one to ever make mistakes. I wasn't ready to play right away, but my first 6 years in Minnesota, I think we had 3 or 4 coordinator changes. And so there was constantly new learning. There's never anything to draw on. I would tell people all the time, it's like learning French one year, you come back your sophomore year and they're going to teach you, Spanish. You come back your 3rd year, we're going to learn German. You come back your 4th year, let's try Polish. It was really hard, and so I went through a lot of changes. I went through head coaching changes. I have shoulder surgery, and so I'm out of football. So sometimes it takes some good fortune, right? It takes a little bit of serendipity, sometimes to find your place. But it also takes somebody that's convinced, that really has an internal belief that, this is a guy that we can win with. And unfortunately, and for whatever reason, and I'm certain some of them were, my own issues. It didn't happen in Minnesota. Marty Schottenheimer. We went 13-3, and I started the last 7 games of the season, and we won 9 of the last 10 games of the season. And he decided to start Elvis Gerbach in the playoff game, the home playoff game against the Broncos, and we lose 14-10. And you say to yourself, like, why? We to this day. I mean, Marty told me years later it was one of the worst decisions he had ever made as a head coach. I mean, the locker room knew I should play. I gave us the best chance to win. That was a team that was really capable of winning a Super Bowl. The Broncos went on to win the Super Bowl that year, but we were a really good team. I mean, we were rolling the last, 7 weeks of the season. And then for Marty to make that decision. So I guess, no one ever really truly believed in me. And that's hard. When I tell young coaches all the time, the relationship between the quarterback and the head coach is absolutely critical. It's really the lifeline of your organization. And Bill Belichick, even though he was a defensive coach, he had a great relationship with Brady. They spent a lot of time together early in the week, game planning, talking about strategy, talking about the defense they're going to face. And, I just didn't have that with Jerry Burns, didn't have it with Denny Green, didn't really have it with Marty Schottenheimer. I thought Marty was a terrific coach. Didn't really get that until he got to Oakland in 99.
So this is a fascinating part of this discussion for me, because you're right. So then Al Davis, our former boss, sees something in you, along with John, right? John's a football and a quarterback specific, played quarterback at Dayton and all that. He knows a quarterback position. How did that relationship forge, and how did you become a Raider?
So I would suggest that it was really, I think John had to convince Mr. Davis. They had Jeff George, who was under contract. He was making a good deal of money. Physically, he was a pretty talented guy, could throw the ball really well. But, they weren't winning. I think John was ready to move on and had to convince Al Davis that we got this guy in Kansas City I think would be a good fit. And there is a little bit of a backstory to it because, Paul Hackett was at the University of Pittsburgh with Mike McCarthy and John Gruden. John was a young assistant under Paul Hackett. And so they had this relationship. We ran the very same offense. The terminology and the verbiage was almost identical. And so John reached out to Paul Hackett and Mike McCarthy and said, hey, tell me about this Gannon guy. And obviously, I had a great relationship with both those coaches. I had success under them. They knew I could play at a high level, and they just knew I needed my own team. And I think Mike and Paul said, hey, look, if you could get this guy, it would be a huge upgrade for you guys, and you wouldn't be disappointed. And so I got the call during free agency to go out. I sat down with Bruce Allen and John over dinner, and then John and I went back to the facility, and we spent like 3 hours just watching film, talking about game plans. There was a certain comfort level almost immediately. And I think we were both at a position in our careers where we really felt like we had something to prove. I think we shared that work ethic, which was important. He said to me, he said, look, we're either going to do this together, we're going to succeed together, or we're going to fail together, but we're going to do it together. And that's all I needed to hear. That was the commitment that I needed from a head coach that I had never gotten up until that point. And the conversation with Mr. Davis was pretty straightforward. I mean, I think, he just wanted to win. I learned a lot from working with Mr. Davis. He was passionate. He was passionate about the Raiders. He was passionate about the National Football League. It was his life. And really enjoyed the opportunity that I had during my 6 years there, just getting to know him and just listening to the stories and listening to his thoughts on players, on teams, on schemes. He's a guy that watched a lot of film over the years.
Rich, let me look at this. So a lot of times when people in the fans, right, hear stories like that, they think of that initial meeting with John, right, in the facility there for the 3 hours that you're talking about, hitting the receiver on the out, how do you incorporate the run game, all those particulars. But what you said is fascinating, which is whatever happens, we're going to do this together. To what extent was everything talked about? Like, what's the quarterback room like? How are we going to run practice? Like the leadership and the ways in which, not the football, because the football is going to take care of itself, but how we are as a franchise moving forward with you, meaning Rich Gannon, as the leader.
I think it was a process. I mean, I think things evolve, once you get there. I never had a problem with leadership. That came very natural to me from a really young age. I think the best leaders are servant leaders, guys that are willing to serve others, guys that are willing to put others before themselves, guys that are willing to put the work in and be selfless. And I think, that was something that just came very natural to me. I wasn't worried about myself. I was worried about others when I got there, because when I first got to the Raiders, I realized there was a lot of work, a lot more than I anticipated. Chris, I'll just be honest with you, man. It was dysfunctional. I mean, I walked into an environment that just, wasn't conducive to winning. I mean, I could see why they didn't win. The all-season program wasn't heavily attended. A lot of the best players didn't participate. There was an underlying attitude in the locker room that we're getting screwed by the league. The league doesn't like us. The officials, throw more flag. I mean, just kind of a loser's mentality. And there were some great players. I mean, don't get me wrong. There were some players that were above that. Tim Brown, Steve Wisniewski. I could go on and on. But there was too many players that were in it for the wrong reasons. In '99, we went 8-8. Easily should have been 12-4. Our kicker, struggled. We missed extra points. We missed field goals. We weren't great defensively, but we were good enough. We were just in about every game with a chance to win. And you could tell like we're really close. But yet it was so frustrating that first year. I'd go out to practice and players would come out 15 minutes late. I'd never seen anything like it. You'd go to a meeting and guys weren't in the meeting. Again, it was just not an environment that's conducive to winning. It's not what I was used to in Kansas City. The best players were the smartest, the toughest, and the hardest working. When you have that situation, then everybody kind of falls in line. I spent my first year in Oakland up in John Gruden's office and Bill Callahan's office every week. I mean, I knew that we couldn't continue to do what we were doing and expect to win. And, John said to me, I'll never forget it. He said to me, look, we're going to get this thing fixed and we're going to get rid of the players that don't belong here, but I can't do it all at once. It's going to take some time. But we started getting rid of those players. And we brought in the players that you're talking about, like a Jerry Rice, like a Rod Woodson, like a Trace Armstrong, a John Perella, Bill Romanowski. We brought in pros. We brought in guys that loved everything about it, loved working out, loved studying, loved practice, loved the meeting room, loved competition. And when you start to bring in players like that, eventually you're going to get it figured out. But it took us a while. But that first year in '99 was a real struggle.
And then you had all that success, right? To your point, all those players start to come in, change the roster, change the dynamic of the organization in totality on the field and such. How much did those guys that you alluded to there, Charles Woodson, right? Charlie Garner, Tyrone Wheatley, John Ritchie, how much did they elevate you, right? Obviously, you're elevating them by your natural, like you said, natural leadership abilities. Now that you saw the complex nature of the roster, how much did they elevate you?
Well, they did. I mean, when you have more talent around, you got better players, more dependable players. It just expanded what we're able to do offensively from a scheme standpoint. And we started getting guys like Charlie Garner, who could play in space, who could be involved in the passing game. You mentioned Tyrone Wheatley, a thumper, a guy that was just tough and durable and dependable, and brought some attitude and a physical presence to the running game. We had a really big physical offensive line. We made a lot of strategic decisions from a personnel standpoint that made us better. And so I think when that happens, obviously, it certainly affects my ability to be efficient and my ability to be more consistent each and every week.
Rich, when you walked into a quarterback's room, whether you're Kansas City, Minnesota, Washington, or the Raiders, when you walked into that quarterback room each and every day, what tone did you set as the number one guy? Let's focus on that, right? Because you had Marcus Tuiasosopo, some others. He was the consistent backup to you. But when you walked into those rooms, what was your goal on a daily basis?
Well, to get better, right? I think we can always get better at our craft. But the key to my success, Chris, was my preparation. I say it all the time, the 5 Ps: proper preparation prevents poor performance. And I just wanted to make sure that not just on Sundays, but every day I walked out on the practice field, I was prepared. Like if I wasn't prepared, if I couldn't call the play in the huddle, if I didn't understand the concept, if I was throwing it to the wrong guy, what message does that send to not just the guys in the huddle, the offensive huddle? What message does it send to the defensive players that are either on the field or watching? What kind of message does it send to Al Davis or John Gruden? These guys are putting in tons of hours to help put us in a position to have a chance to be successful and ultimately try and compete for a world championship. What kind of message does that send? So, I wanted to make sure that I was prepared physically, mentally to go out and really play at a high level every day. And I just think when I walked into the quarterback room, I walked in as to try and be a great teammate. We drafted Marcus Tuiasosopo. If you talk to Tui today, he'll tell you that, of all the players, I went out of my way to help him. Like, I would make him come in on Tuesdays and watch film with me. I'd answer his questions. I would give him tips and pointers. I showed him, why I wrote notes and how I would decipher game plans and the quarterback tip sheets. And, I tried to help Bobby Hoying and Rodney Pete and anybody who was in that quarterback room with us, because it takes a team, and I think, we had a great cooperative quarterback room. We had some great quarterback rooms everywhere I played, but the ones in Oakland were pretty special because we had some great coordinators, but John Gruden was in there all the time, right? Think about that. You got a head coach, the primary play caller, the guy that's really touching and working with the quarterback each and every day. And that's why that relationship was so important. I think when you talk about, great working relationship, it always starts with communication. And I think John and I had a great, very sophisticated line and level of communication that really helped both of us have great success.
And then he gets traded to Tampa after the 0-1 season, after the Tuck game, right? Bill Callahan takes over. That 2002 Raider team is one of the best teams I've ever seen. Tell me about that team, why that team was so successful, and to the credit of Bill Callahan and everybody who was part of that team.
Yeah, you can make the argument that 2000 team was pretty good too. I got hurt against the Ravens in the AFC Championship game. Had that not happened, we might have won a Super Bowl there. I think that was a really good team, and I think the 2002 team was good. Although I would say, Chris, the dynamics on that team were different. I think we overcame a lot of adversity inside the building. We clearly had some internal issues. A lot I've never really publicly spoken about, but this goes back to, I don't know if you remember, we played the Cowboys in a preseason game in Mexico in 2001, and I didn't play in the game, and it was a big story. I basically told John and Bruce I wasn't going to play. There was a lot of things that were happening at the hotel the night before. There was parties, there was federales knocking on doors, there was guys missing curfew. I came down to the team meal that morning, and a lot of the guys were hungover, guys were late. One of the offensive linemen said to me, "Don't hold the ball tonight. I don't have my best stuff." And I kind of blew a fuse. I started dealing with it in 99, 2000, and now we're getting ready to start the 2001 season. We have all these great aspirations. We feel like we've got a good team. And, I just know the focus is not where it needs to be. And so I just, I got on the bus to go to the game, and on the bus ride to the stadium, it's all the guys were talking about. A lot of them anyway, were talking about, last night and the parties and things that were going on. I just thought, we're getting ready to play a game, even though it's a preseason game, and guys aren't even focused. And I had enough. And I just told John, and John got really mad at me. Bruce got mad at me, and we had words on the field before the game. And I just was like, you know what? I'll go sell life insurance. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm working too hard, putting too much time, effort, energy into it. To like, if we're not all going to be on the same page, and like, go find somebody else to do it. You know what I mean? I didn't feel like I was getting the support, from him, and from, obviously the rest of the coaching staff. And so it was a big story. And, some of the guys on the team, I would say a minority, so a small number, were very supportive. The majority of the guys on the team were angry, felt like I betrayed them, felt like I quit on the team. And so I just remember coming back to Oakland, and my wife and I, Shelly, had to go meet with John. I had to go talk to Mr. Davis. It was a big deal. And players felt like I threw them under the bus. And ironically, right, fast forward to the Super Bowl, and one of our players doesn't show up. And so, it was, guys partied all week at the Super Bowl. We had a 1 week turnaround. I mean, we overcame a lot, but it was just like, to this day, like my one regret, obviously I didn't play well in the game. We got behind. You start trying to take chances and things like that. But, it's just like, when you talk about trust your instincts, right? You talk about be a leader. Like I thought I did what was right at the time. You know what I mean? I look back on it, and like, we had like that year in 2002, like there's a reason we lost 4 straight games. On the surface, we looked like a really good team. Behind the scenes, we were dealing with a lot of issues. That's my biggest regret. We just couldn't put aside all the other nonsense just for 1 week and just go down to San Diego and just commit. And a lot of guys did. I think that's important. Like, a lot of guys did, but the same group of guys that kind of carried on and misbehaved, had their fun down there. And I look back on those years in Oakland with, fondness, but also disappointment, because I really felt like we had some really good teams. We had a coach that was really committed. We get through 2001, we lose a tuck rule game, and then Mr. Davis trades away John, which, as much as I love Al Davis, I think it was the worst decision he ever made. I think history will show that it's just not a good decision. We had so much chemistry, we had so many good things happening. We were so close, and then they give it all away. It really set the organization back.
When you think about your career on the field, you look back fondly, correct? How do you look? I should ask you.
I love, and look, that's who I associate with, right? I got my Raider hat on. I mean, I still call Raider preseason games. I'm still, I still involved with the organization. I still get out there. I still go to practice when I can, and when I'm in town. And look, I love the Raiders, and I want them to win the worst way. There's been we're going through like coaching changes, quarterback changes, system changes. It's just. And, Chris, you talked about leadership. To me, it always boils down to leadership, right? You got to say, like, who are the leaders in the building, right? And do you have them in every position group? In other words, when you're building a football team, you really want to have a great leader in that defensive back room. You want to have a great leader, tough guy and smart guy in that linebacker room, or in the defensive line room, the quarterback room. Leadership can't come from just one person. When you're talking about 53 players, it's got to come from, a bunch of different rooms. And I think that's really where it starts. All the great teams I've been around, all the teams that I've covered for CBS Sports, teams that have obviously, teams that are competing for championships every year. You look and you say, where's the leadership? It's pretty evident. In order to have a great team, you have to have continuity, consistency, and leadership at every level of your organization. I mean, you look at the Patriots, their dominance for 2 decades. The owner, the head coach, and the quarterback. They were there for 2 decades together until Brady left to go to Tampa Bay. But for 2 decades, that's who you're dealing with. And not only that, but sprinkled throughout those great Patriot teams were guys like Teddy Bruschi and Richard Seymour and Ty Law. And, you could go down the list, Mike Vrabel. I mean, they had tons of guys that were doing it for the right reason. And that's the thing. Like, you got to be doing it for the right reason. And, like I talked about that 99 team, there was too many guys that weren't doing it for the right reason. They didn't like practice. They didn't like to work hard. You know what I mean? They didn't like the preparation. They didn't like, going back out and making the corrections. They weren't like the toughest guys and the most committed that were going to give you everything they had for 60 minutes. And when I say I'm not talking about all of them, I'm talking about a percentage of them. A percentage. If you have 53 players, you're never going to have 53 players that are all at that level that you want. But the team that's got 47, that's playing a team that has 25, the team that's got 47 is usually going to win. That's my experience.
You got it. Like you said, 47 out of the 53 are dialed in versus 25. Who's going to win and what will the records be at the end of the year? Very good point. Okay, rapid fire, then we'll wrap it up, my friend. All right, here we go. Rich, we call them the all-star moments. Here we go. In a general sense, how do you deal with adversity?
That's a great question. I think the realization that it's coming, right? Like I think some young people think it's, life is just going to be, easy. It's not. I think as you mature, you realize that adversity is just around the corner. Like it's never going to go away. Obstacles, challenges, rough days, hard days, setbacks, disappointments, losses, it's just coming. And you've got to be mentally, physically, and spiritually strong enough to understand that it's coming. And it's how we deal with adversity. Do we learn from those experiences? Do we learn from those setbacks? Are we able to dig down deep, in our heart and our soul to be able to pull ourselves out of the big hole?
Number two, how do you give yourself fuel?
It gets harder as you get older. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
The most successful people that I've ever been around at anything, there's a certain discipline that these people have. I always tell young people, like there's these 10 things that don't require any talent. Like I tell this to young people all the time, like, I was a talented player, but I wasn't the most talented player. But I really felt like, as I said to you before, my advantage when I stepped onto the field on Sunday, I knew I was the most prepared. I knew that. I knew I was better prepared than the other team's quarterback. I knew I was better prepared than the linebacker or the safety we're playing against. I knew that I was ready to match wits with the defensive coordinator and the other team. Like I knew, like I studied him. I knew his fastball was. I knew that John and I were on the same page with audibles and protection changes. Like I was ready. I was ready for the fight. I was ready for the battle. But in terms of like things that don't require a ton of talent, I share this with young people all the time. I'll give you 10 of them. Ready? Be on time. Have great work ethic, great effort, great energy. Make sure your body language is upbeat, confident, passion. Do the extra work it takes to be successful. Be prepared, be coachable, and have a good attitude. But like I said, be on time, great work ethic, and that so there's some of the things like that's what I brought to the table. Like that doesn't require any talent. It's the mental and the physical discipline to be there and to show up with that attitude every day. Like I can do more. Like it starts with me.
Let's leave it at that. I've got other little rapid fires, but you know what? You took it and you ran with it, and you were more prepared than the host, and that is easily obvious statement right there. Thank you so much, Rich. This was fantastic.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me, brother. Really appreciate it.
And we thank Rich very much for being on the show. My number one takeaway is this: it's very difficult to lead, and it's very difficult to lead as a quarterback in the NFL. That is what this conversation was all about, obviously. Rich, trying to get everyone on the same page. Accountability, being accountable to yourself and accountable to your teammates. Discipline, work ethic, getting everyone to understand we are all in this for each other, right? Uniting the 53-man roster. And I will give you one other peek behind the scenes. As part of the content group of the Oakland Raiders, we were invited to go behind the scenes with Rich into the quarterback room. We spent probably 45 minutes to an hour with Rich. The over-under for the amount of times he said 2 words, defensive coordinator, is probably north of 150. He said the defensive coordinator split out wides. We have to outthink the defensive coordinator on the blitz. The defensive coordinator may think that our offensive coordinator is going to go 3rd and long, an out route. It was amazing. It was a beautiful mind in action. I really respect the way Rich approached his job, how he approached his job at CBS, and we thank him very much for being on Keep the Line Moving, and I thank you for being part of it each and every week. Have a great week, everybody. We thank you. We'll see you next time on Keep the Line Moving. Every week, you hear guests on this podcast talk about some of their biggest leadership challenges. As a leader, you want to make an impact on those you lead and reach your organization's goals, while also optimizing your time management. Wherever you are in your leadership journey, we could all use some help. This is what we focus on with our group and individual coaching services. To book a call or get more information, email me directly at chrisg@garganoleadership.com or visit our website at garganoleadership.com. For our podcast and video producer, Jack Radutsky, and our marketing coordinator, Savin Narwal, have a great week, everybody.